Okay, just got the recording started. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. My name is Lexi Beer. I am the Director of Outreach here at KGI, and we are joined by 3 of our MBS faculty members. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but this is a great opportunity for you to hear from them, not only about the MBS program, but about what you're here for today, which is career in the biotechnology space. So that is what we'll be focusing on today. But I do want to let you know you're welcome to use the chat at any time. I'll try and keep up with the chat as I can, and then we'll have some time for Q&A as well. And you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask your question or use the chat, whichever you're more comfortable with. But we would be happy to see your faces if you'd like to share your video and talk with us. So thank you again for coming, and I will hand things over to Dr. West.
Well, I'd like to let my colleagues go ahead and introduce themselves.
Yeah, go ahead, Kumar.
Okay. If Dr. West and Dr. Casper allows me to do this, if you could, all turn on your video feed, that'll be great, because it'll be great to see you guys when we're talking. And I understand if you're in between meetings and you're about to get lunch or something, for a brief while, it's okay to turn on the camera. But otherwise, we feel it feels there's a better connection, right? So anyway, so I am Kumar. I did my PhD from Virginia Tech in organizational behavior, specifically management, specifically organizational behavior. I was a veterinarian once in my previous life. That was my basic background. I did a degree in pharmacology as well. So I never thought that I will eventually end up at KGI, which has all of the pharmacology and pharmaceutical science people here. So anyway, so that is my background, and I do research in a specific area called emotional intelligence and how it applies to the workplace. I also do some work in mindfulness and spirituality, and I also teach courses in leadership, organizational behavior, and also teach a sort of basic course in statistics. So that is just a quick introduction to what I do.
And my name's Steve Casper. I'm on the faculty here at KGI. I've been here almost 20 years, pretty much since the beginning of KGI. I'm a social science researcher. I teach on the management curriculum here at KGI, and I do research on the bioscience industries, the biotechnology industries, comparing how it's organized in different countries and looking at how science comes out of universities and turns into companies. So a lot about bio-entrepreneurship. I was the dean here for a few years, so I know a lot about KGI, and I've also been the MBS program director, and it's the program that I think is just the best program in the world. It's awesome. So really looking forward to you guys hearing about it. Joel? Oh, I think you muted Joe.
Sorry, I muted because I was eating some snacks to get ready for the talk, so my apologies. I'm Joel West. I've been here 11 years, and I teach entrepreneurship classes. I'm on my second startup. I'm doing a KGI spinoff, pharmaceutical startup, and I had a software spinoff before that. I also teach our innovation strategy class, and I've also taught strategy and marketing classes. And for the last 2.5 years, I've been the director of the MBS program. So I'm going to talk about kind of overall picture of the life science industries, and then give you some examples of what we've learned from our own experience placing our graduates into the industry. All right, so let's see if I can get this to, okay, all right. So you'll hear a bunch of names given for this. People talk about life science industries. I tend to like biomedical products, but people talk about bioscience or different names. The one thing I would say is that life science will sometimes include agriculture, synthetic fuels, things like that, whereas biomedical is clearly products that are related to human health. And then there's a question, is the healthcare industry, is that part of this or is it separate? But we really today want to talk about people who make products that save human lives. And then there's the question of what is biotechnology? The industry and academics don't really agree. So people might say, well, biotechnology is the production of a biotechnology drug, sometimes called a biologic, which was not possible before the biotech revolution. Some people might say it's anything that leverages what Stan Cohen and Herb Boyer invented in 1984, the idea of recombinant DNA. Sometimes people just use it to refer to young startup companies in the life science area, or companies using newer technology. So sometimes, for example, healthcare information technology would be biotech, even though there's really no bio associated with it. So when you hear people talk about they want to go into biotech, sometimes they mean it in a very specific sense, and sometimes they mean it more generally, say entrepreneurial companies. And so the textbook I use for one of my entrepreneurship classes called Biotechnology Entrepreneurship kind of uses this sort of broader definition of any sort of newer, younger startup company in the life science sector. But really, when you look at the major life science industries related to human health, we've got the four areas: the traditional pharmaceuticals related to small molecule chemical processes going back hundreds of years, the biologic large molecules therapeutics that have been around for a little more than 30 years, medical devices, and medical diagnostics. So if you look at kind of these four segments, really the largest is traditional pharma. So there'd be a company like Merck or Pfizer or Bristol Myers. But the biotech pharma have been growing more recently. Amgen and Gilead are the two largest biotech companies in California. In fact, Amgen's the largest in the world. Celgene is a Boston-based company. Then you have medical device companies. So these might be making anything from a cardiac monitor for intensive care to a hip replacement. Abbott, Edwards, Medtronic are examples of these companies. Diagnostic companies have been very much in the news in the last 2 years. How do we know if we have COVID? Well, a diagnostic company figured out a way to measure your nasal passages or your saliva or your serum or whatnot, and tell whether or not there's some presence or indicator of the COVID coronavirus too in your body. And then finally, we have research tools, which are not directly for human health, but they're very related because they're made with similar technologies and also have similar skill sets. And some of the tools companies, for example, also make diagnostics. So these are kind of the five major life science industries that make a lot of biomedical products. So the small molecule products manufactured, and they work the chemical process. And what's interesting from a business standpoint, and the three of us are business professors, is that a drug that might have been very expensive and a blockbuster, now that it's off patent, is very inexpensive over the counter. I'm a Kaiser Permanente member. That means we have Kaiser factory medicine, as we like to say, going back to Henry Kaiser in World War II. And so they try to get you on generics anytime they can. So if I have a blood pressure issue, they're going to try 3 or 4 or 5 generic drugs that 10 years ago or 30 years ago were blockbuster drugs making billions of dollars a year. And now, because the patents are gone, they're available for pennies a dose, both in the US and throughout the world. And so if you look at the company make all pharmaceutical products, so both the large molecule and the small molecule, Roche, based in Switzerland, and their Genentech biotech subsidiary in San Francisco are number 1. Novartis is number 2. Pfizer was number 3. I think with the COVID vaccine sales, Pfizer is probably back to number 1 because they were number 1 at one point. Merck, Bristol Myers, US firms, Johnson & Johnson, known for baby powder and baby shampoo, and also medical devices in addition to their pharmaceuticals. And then a couple of European companies, a Japanese company. So these are examples of sort of the big names of the pharmaceutical industry. Now, my last biology class was in high school. I've picked up what I could, but if you have a question about the science of these different companies, Professor Casper is the expert here on this call. But one way to look at large molecule therapeutics is, are they made through microbial fermentation? Are they made through mammalian cultivation? Are they made through some sort of transgenic cells, such as from living animals? But the difference here is that instead of making these therapies by chemical reactions. We're making them by some sort of biological process, which is slower, more expensive, and less consistent. And so therefore, it turns out that if you have a chemical formula for a small molecule, it's pretty easy for hundreds of Chinese and Indian companies to make any small molecule therapeutic. Whereas for biologics, there are a small number of companies that really can do this reliably. And so in some ways, the state of the art of manufacturing biologics is still very much closely held by a small number of companies in the industry. So the first biotech company in the world was Genentech. They were founded in 1976. They were launched to make synthetic insulin because up to that point, it had to come from animal products. As you might imagine, it was problematic to get quality and volume. They're now very prominent in cancer drugs. They were bought by Roche, sold by Roche, and now they've been bought by Roche, and they've been a subsidiary of Roche ever since. And they're located just next to the San Francisco airport in the Bay Area. Amgen is today the largest life science company headquartered in California. It's the largest independent biotech firm. We're at KGI, we're at the east end of LA County, and they're just across the line from the west end of LA County. They were first known for their anemia drug when there was the doping scandals in the Tour de France and other professional bicycle racing that was using their drug Epogen. But more recently, they've been focusing on autoimmune diseases such as rheumatoid arthritis and their cancer drugs. And they're also KGI's largest employer. Gilead Sciences, a little bit younger, started as a small molecule company, but really it become the leading maker of antiviral biologics. Tamiflu was the first treatment for the common flu. They have a number of HIV and hepatitis C drugs, and theirs was the first antiviral to treat COVID, remdesivir. And historically, they and Amgen go back and forth as to which one is the largest biotech firm based on the value of the company. Okay, next up, I want to talk about various medical devices and diagnostic. We often put these together because three of them are electronics products. So, a diagnostic device is an electronics product. A heart monitor is an electronics product. An artificial heart is electronics. Direct brain stimulation, those are all electronics products. And then you have the orthopedics, which are structural products, replacement, titanium replacement for a hip joint or a leg or something like that. But much of the medical device and diagnostics industry kind of looks like the computer industry. It's computer controlled electronics manufacturing, components and things like that. And so in some ways, it has a lot more in common than, say, with traditional IT than it does with making chemical or biologic therapeutics. So the largest California maker of any sort of medical device is Edwards Life Sciences. They were founded in 1958. They were acquired and they were spun off again in 2000. They're the US leader in making artificial heart valves. And they're also the largest life science company in Orange County, which is just south of LA County. And they're the closest Fortune 500 biomedical company to KGI. Also closest to the beach, by the way. Illumina is the largest San Diego company. They're the leader in DNA sequencing, and they're a little bit younger, but they really hold a dominant position in making DNA sequencing equipment. Now, if you have questions about this is really Professor Casper's area. He's actually, before I came to KGI, I knew him because he was the leading researcher on the biotechnology in California. San Francisco and San Diego were the two hubs of biotechnology going back to the 80s. Los Angeles and Orange County has been smaller, but obviously with Amgen has one of the world's largest companies there. And these California companies have changed the lives of millions of people through their innovation. So one of the things we have is sometimes we get students in our program who were going to go to medical school and be doctors. And they wanted to do it because they wanted to save lives. And that's certainly a noble goal and an important goal of a doctor. But with an MD or a nurse or a PA, you're saving lives one at a time. And with biomedical products, if you have a new oncology drug approved, in your first year, you could be saving tens or hundreds of thousands of lives just because you and your coworkers have worked for the last 5 or 10 years to bring this new oncology drug to market. So it's a different way of saving lives and meeting patients one-to-one, but it has the potential to have more impact because when your product succeeds, you can touch thousands or even millions of patients that you never meet. So these were, there was a study done about 5 years ago on the impact of the life science industry in California. Roughly 3,000 companies, almost 300,000 jobs directly in life science industry. And they're well paying and it's a rapidly growing industry. So it's really important and it's a really good place to get a job because there aren't enough good people and these jobs are out there. People can prepare themselves for these careers. Okay, so next I want to kind of get closer to Professor Kumar's area. I'll talk a little bit more about job titles and what people do in the company because I'm a strategy guy. He can talk to you about kind of what skills, both hard skills and soft skills are needed. And we're going to have a time in about 10, 15 minutes where the three of us are just going to stop and answer any questions you might have about life science careers. But I want to kind of give you some of these statistics to give you a backdrop for that. So when a strategy person or a human resources person talks about job functions, they're really saying these are different departments or vertical silos within a company. Like all the people who do marketing would work for a VP of marketing. All the people that do finance would work for a VP of finance or the chief financial officer. People in regulatory would work for the chief regulatory officer or maybe the chief medical officer. And so basically the sort of skills you do to go get a marketing job are pretty similar no matter what marketing job you're applying for, and similarly for finance and regulatory and so on. So a lot of times what people are doing when they come to KGI, they know they want to go work for a biomedical company, but they don't know what job they want to do. And they want to kind of put their toe in the water in a couple of ways. And so this is one of the things that people are doing in their first 1 to 2 semesters of graduate school is trying to find the fit between what their skills are and what they're good at and what they enjoy and what kind of jobs are out there in these biomedical companies. Because they're, these are good companies, good jobs, great advancement potential, good quality of life. I mean, they treat their workers the way a Silicon Valley company would treat their workers. But people have to figure out, well, okay, within an Amgen or within an Edwards, what kind of job do I want to do? And so typically the business roles, as in a lot of companies would be, in any industry would be marketing, project management and product management, operations, manufacturing, supply chain, financing, and then I'll come back to consulting, which is usually outside the company and not inside the company. So what does a marketing person do? My PhD was originally in marketing. I have taught marketing here and there. I teach entrepreneurial marketing in the business plan class. And what a marketing person is doing is either trying to understand the needs. So what are the unmet needs? So for example, if you have a cardiovascular drug, these cardiovascular drugs have been out there for 10 or 30 or 50 years. So what needs for people with heart disease or stroke or high blood pressure are not currently being well met in the market? So for example, Kaiser put me on a blood pressure disease medication that had a side effect of excess coughing. And they didn't warn me about that, but it's like within 2 days, I knew that drug was not going to work for me. And so that's an example of, even though it's out there, for some people, it may not be a good solution. And so one of the things you're trying to do in marketing is to do market research, to talk to patients or to scour the internet or scour social media or market research reports to understand what needs are well met and what needs are not well met. With cancer, there are always people who are dying of cancer because the existing drugs can't treat all cancers and all mutations of cancers. Marketing roles also could include creating demand, marketing communications, which usually people are good at writing, often creative or creative design. So good English language skills or oral spoken skills. Sales and distribution. I mean, products don't sell themselves. They do need to have a sales and distribution channel to get it from, say, the Amgen factory in Thousand Oaks to a hospital in Boston or Chicago or Little Rock, Arkansas. And then a role that usually spans project management and product and marketing is product management, which is making decisions about how a product comes to market and how the different parts of bringing a product to market come all come together at once. And we have a number of KGI students who like this because it's a very cross-functional job between the technical, the regulatory, the business, and the operations. And they really find it rewarding to be sort of in the middle of all of those things that are going on. Project management is a great way to break into these world-class companies, because basically what we need is we need somebody who's detail-oriented, good people skills, and are likable, and can make sure that things get done. A project manager has a lot of responsibility and no authority. So you're basically, as I like to say, you're trying to get people to do the job they promised to do that they don't want to do because they're busy doing something else. And so we have a lot of people who start in that area and really find it rewarding. And the other thing that they find rewarding is they get their foot in the door at an Amgen or an Edwards or a Gilead or something, and then they can kind of figure out which job within the company they really like. And because they're working with all pieces of the company, they can kind of parachute into one of those jobs. And as I said, the product manager is somebody who's really coordinating the project of bringing a new product to market. And they have to have both marketing content knowledge and project management skills. Operations, this is an interesting one. I didn't know about pharmaceutical operations or biotech operations before I came to KGI 10.5 years ago. And we have students who've never heard of these jobs until they come to KGI, and they really get excited about it because it, again, is very cross-functional. You have to think about what's the business case, if we're manufacturing for clinical trials, how the clinical trial is going. But you also have to understand enough of the technology to understand how these biologics get manufactured. Or maybe you're working in manufacturing in a way to make sure that the promises that Gilead or Amgen made to the FDA are kept, that every drug is manufactured in accordance to the promises that the company made to the FDA. So those are examples of operations roles. And they really, again, are very detail-oriented, consistency, quality, and often, how can we do the job that we've been doing more efficiently? Finance, we tend to think of, Wall Street, people who buy and sell stocks and bonds and things like that. But also there's finance roles in people who are venture capitalists or angel investors. They're trying to come up with a value for a company that's not yet public. And how do you decide what the company's worth? If you're going to give them $20 million, does that give you 30% of the company or 50% of the company? Or you may be acquiring a technology. We have several of our students recent graduates who are now working in buying technologies for medium-sized companies from little tiny companies that need help bringing the technology to market. So we have 2 recent graduates that are working for Jazz Pharmaceuticals and really love what they're doing. And then a lot of times we have students who eventually end up in corporate finance, which is the company has so much money to spend in R&D, and how can it best spend that money to improve the product pipeline that the company is developing for the next 10 or 20 years. Now, I would say in terms of job placement, our most consistent placement is regulatory affairs. And the clinical and regulatory roles are filing complex forms that meet FDA standards for the approval of a drug. An IND is for putting something into humans. An NDA is for a new small molecule drug. A BLA is for a new biologic drug. A 510K is for a medical device. And so the people who fill this out, you really have to have good attention to detail and work on this a long period of time. Well, sometimes, like, for example, if you're managing clinical trials, you may be managing nurses or hospital sites that are running the study, or you may be dealing directly with patients. And so that's very much a people job. So a lot of this is very much focused on the regulatory side, but there are also, as I said, the more people-oriented jobs as well. Okay, and then one of these things is not like the other. This is where you're working for an outside firm. People have heard of maybe Accenture, or McKinsey, or Bain, or these other consulting firms. And there are many consulting firms that either have a presence in the life science or primarily in the life science industry. And so you work on a different project every month or two. And as I said, these may be generalist companies like an Accenture or Deloitte, or a specialist company like, say, Syneos or Desi Bio. And typically graduates who do this do it for 2 to 5 years, and then about half to 2/3 of them leave and go work at a blue chip company or even a startup company, because they They want to they figured out what they really enjoy doing. And after they've been trained on all these skills, they parachute into those jobs. So this and project management are two jobs that allow people to kind of start their careers without knowing exactly what they enjoy best. Okay, and finally, before we go to the question and answer, I just wanted to kind of summarize what we see from placing our students. You know, the MBS, the Master of Business and Science, was our original program, our first graduating class, the majority of our grads for the first 15 years. And we have more than 850 alumni, and most of these are working in some sort of biomedical industry. And what we're really proud of is KGI was built and the MBS were built for strong ties to industry. A typical, you know, I graduated from UCI, as did Professor Casper. You know, a typical university does a lot of things, pursuit of science, et cetera, but KGI is very much was created as a professional, a graduate institute to prepare people for industry careers, and the MBS remains that way. And so our content is very focused not on general knowledge, but knowledge that's applicable to working in these companies. And we have ties to the board of trustees, through our corporate advisors, through our employers, through our alumni, to all of these major employers, particularly those in the West. Sorry, yes, Mary, did you have a question? Okay, well, I have a couple more slides and then we'll be going to the Q&A panel, which we'd love to hear all your questions. So as I mentioned, we, you know, these major companies in California, such as Amgen, Gilead, Edwards, Illumina. We also send to companies in the Midwest and the East Coast, and we send to consulting firms. And if you look at our recent placement, I looked at all the LinkedIn profiles of our graduates from the last 4 years. You have 36% in these 4 companies, Amgen, Gilead, Roche, and Edwards. And then we have 19% of our graduates went in consulting. So basically 55% of our graduates in the last 4 years went either to one of these 4 companies or into one of the consulting firms. So it gives you kind of a sense that there are lots of other people who go to Stryker or Abbott or smaller companies in Northern California or Southern California. But this is kind of maybe gives you a sense of what the most common path is. And then similarly, in those same 4 graduating class, 46% of the students go into business, 31% go into regulatory, 14% do some sort of operations, manufacturing, supply chain job, and then 9% go into technical jobs such as a bench scientist or engineer. So this is just kind of, again, kind of represents those numbers in a graphical form. And as you can see, business, ClinReg, and operations are by far the biggest every year. So we have 7 concentrations, what we sometimes call the majors, examples of jobs of people who want to go into business: project manager, a consultant, a strategy analyst, a marketing manager. Those are examples of what people who did the business concentration did. We have a bioprocessing concentration. So we have a pure bioprocessing degree called an MEng. And then with a bioprocessing concentration that's more of a tweener that combines both business and technical skills. And so, for example, that works really well if you're going to be working as a project manager because you have both of those skills. But some of them go into the technical side of a process scientist, or we're even working regulatory affairs because they understand the regulatory issues associated with manufacturing biologics. In terms of clinical regulatory, Edwards and their clinical regulatory entry-level development program is very common. Regulatory affairs specialist is pretty typical. And some people go into clinical research, which, as I mentioned, is managing or talking to people who are managing clinical trials, which is different than doing the paperwork to get regulatory approval. And then finally, I just wanted to kind of show kind of the progression over time. Amgen, as I mentioned, is our largest employer. So this kind of gives you a sense of how over a course of 10 or 15 years, you get promoted into different roles within the same organization. So I just looked at KGI alumni at Amgen who work in operations. and you'll come in like an associate or a senior associate. After a few years, you make manager and then senior manager, and then you might become director. And now I think we have actually a senior director as well. But this is an example of kind of what happens is if you stay in a blue chip company and work your way up the company, you get increasing responsibility, authority, pay, stress, visibility, and span of control. Okay, I'm going to skip this in the interest of time because I want to make sure we have questions. I was going to talk about some of our KGI alumni working in COVID companies, but let me just go ahead and kind of turn the floor open to any questions you might have. And all the three of us would be glad to answer your questions, and you can either direct it to one of us or just ask all of us to respond to your question.
I have a question.
Thanks, Renee. Go ahead.
My question was, what are the advantages that you would say, all three of you, of deciding to pursue the MBS versus a PhD? Like, do they open, does a graduate of like MBS or a PhD, does one degree open up more doors than another, or what would you say?
I can take that one on if you want. And maybe, Joe, maybe stop sharing screen so we can.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Oh.
I've done that. Yes.
So we actually have students go from the MBS to PhD occasionally. But to me, the big decision is, do you want to wear like a white lab coat and be designing research at a organization, be it a company or a university? If you want to be designing research and be kind of a scientist, you probably want to get a PhD. And there's an advantage to that, in that through the NIH, they fund a lot of life science PhDs for free. But they're very, very narrow. You're going to be a scientist for sure. And it's fairly challenging to move out of the PhD science role into other roles in industry. And the job market is extremely competitive for science roles, both at universities and companies. But all three of us got a PhD and we're happy, so it worked, right? So that's PhD. And so the MBS degree is, you're likely to be managing those scientists or working with those scientists or project managing them or working on the operations of how manufacturing or how science takes place, or making decisions that integrate both clinical and business rationales into how programs should be managed for drug development, or any other role where you have to have that science background. Like, nobody can go into the bioscience industry without a science background. It's just impossible because it's a science-based industry. So you still have that science background. And on the MBS program, about half the curriculum is applied science. But we also teach you all those other skills in project management, in operations, in marketing, in ethics, in organizational behavior, so you can get those other jobs, regulatory, clinical, and so forth. So it's mostly a kind of a pretty big decision of what it is you want to do. The nice thing about MBS, though, is that if you finish the program, you can do our technical track and take a lot of lab-based science classes while you're here and get that PhD. So you can do that. But the vast majority, I would say 98% of people that do the MBS end up in these great careers in industry.
Kumar, do you want to talk to your experience as a PhD or your experience in the veterinary medicine?
Oh, no, I was just, I would add that, what Steve touched on in terms of the, if you get a PhD, Renee, and then you want to still go into the industry. So let's say through the PhD, your aim is not just to become a bench scientist, although that should be your primary goal, right? Like if you're doing a PhD, that is typically the goal, is to become a proper, traditional scientist role. But then if you want to go into the industry and let's say you want to work as a, let's say, consultant or some kind of technical advisory role within the industry, which many of my family members are, what I can tell you is that the first job taking from the PhD, from the academic world, when you do, obviously if you do a PhD, you also typically have to do a postdoc, right? In biology, that's very common because the market is very saturated, right? So you need to have multiple years of postdoc. So after you do the postdoc, when you try to switch to the industry, that first job can be hard. I mean, it depends. Like sometimes you can, if you have contacts, and especially through KGI, for example, KGI has a lot of alumni connections and they work closely with alumni, which is very, very unique at KGI when compared to other institutions, right? Where I did my MBA, you're supposed to have connections with the alumni, but it's not as close as KGI because maybe perhaps KGI is smaller overall in size, and so we have closer connections with the alumni, and they're all in good position. They're willing to help out. So PhD at KGI, maybe slightly higher chance, but otherwise it'll be very difficult for you to get into the industry for that first job. Once you get the first job, yes, you can further pursue your other corporate type careers, and you actually get promoted sooner than maybe other people. But with MBS, as Steve rightly pointed out, you're straight away you get into those kinds of roles, right? Like managing people, being a project manager. You're probably organizing and coordinating activities of these scientists, right? These PhD scientists. So you still need to know the language they're speaking, right? You still need to be aware of, if a deadline is not met, and if they say, oh, this happened, you need to know what that is, at least be familiar with it. And so that is what KGI gives with the MBS degree, is that it's an emulsion, right? Oil and water, not separate. I often use that analogy here. Both biotech, biology stuff and business things are, sort of merged together. So you cannot escape one if you're in a science class, right? You cannot escape business elements when you're in a science class. You cannot escape science when you're in a business class, right? All of those things are merged into most of the classes at KGI. Anyway, so that's my 2 cents. Oh.
Yeah, this is great. Joe, you're muted again.
Professor Casper and I have worked with the American Society for Cell Biology, who are trying to help biology PhDs get into industry. And this is the analysis they did several years ago, which basically said that 8% of PhD students become tenure track faculty. So the idea of getting a PhD and going to academia is really the alternative career. And the current industry researchers aren't all that common, but there are certainly a number of them. There are about a quarter of them. And a lot of people end up either in non-tenure track academic jobs, or they end up doing non-science jobs of some way, shape, or form. So anyway, this is their statistics. I'll put it in the chat just so you have it. But they basically, since the 1990s, there's been an oversupply of biology PhDs, because NIH has been putting out their money to allow PhDs to hire PhD students and postdocs well in excess of the number of people who can get jobs in academia.
And the number of postdoc years, from my anecdotal evidence, is I think more than 4 or 5 years of postdocs, which is considered, I mean, if you want to get into competitive schools, like, schools that are highly ranked in research, the only exception is if you can get a grant right about when you're about to graduate PhD, or if you in your first or second year of postdoc, if you're able to get a grant that allows you to transfer that to a new position, a university will take you with the grant, right? They will be happy to get you. And not all grants are transferable, right? Because they also look at the institution where you're working at and the facilities that they have. At least one of my friends did that. He was able to secure that. I think there's a Steve, I don't remember the name of that grant. There's a grant that NIH gave specifically to new faculty members or new
early career grants, yeah.
Early career grants.
And Renee, we love this topic, so we can talk about it all day, as you can see.
Yeah.
But yeah. I think they're both awesome tracks. It's just they're real different is the key thing, and they both can work out for you.
Thank you for the answers.
Gwen, do you want to ask your question?
Hi. The talk's been really interesting so far. I would turn my camera on, but there's a lot of things going on behind me. Anyways, I'm a current freshman at Pitzer College right now, and I'm really interested in biotech and business. So I'm just wondering, what can I, as a current freshman with little to no career experience, do over the summer to be more involved in biotech and business?
I would say that typically what we see, we see students who are juniors and then seniors and obviously graduate and come to us. And really for the first year or two, it's pretty much lab work or clinical work, because you don't have the business courses, you don't really have expertise in this area. But if you get in a small company, you kind of see all aspects of what they do. Whereas if you work in a big company, like one of our current students has a part-time job working at a clinical lab. And all he does is make sure that these lab samples get analyzed correctly because it's a large national firm and that's what he does. But if you work in a small company with, say, less than 20 people, even if you're doing lab work, you're going to meet people, you're going to meet the CEO, you're going to meet the head of marketing, you're going to go sit in meetings where somebody explains to you the financial impact of the science not working, or why it is important to get the costs down on manufacturing this thing, or whatever the business issue is. So in that regard, if you want to kind of get more of a taste of what the business side is, you're probably going to have to come in on the technical side if that's what your degree is, but you'll be more exposed to the business side if you're in a smaller company than if you're in a large company.
Yeah, Gwen, I can add to that. Great response. This is not going to be for 3 years, but one thing you can do when you're a senior is we have a program through the Joint Science Department where you can do your senior theses on one of our biotech sponsored so-called team masters projects. So we all have great students in the Clemmer colleges working on our projects right now. I'm doing a project with Amgen right now, the big biotech company, and we have a CMC student on that. And I've had Pittsburgh students in the past. So that's one thing you can aim for, is make sure you wrap up so you can get involved in that program. And you can just bug any one of us, remind me in 3 years from now that, hey, I want to know, because it's not widely advertised. It's through the science and management major, fundamentally at CMC, but we've had Scripps and Pittsburgh students do it too. So you could do it for sure. So that's one thing you can do. Another thing you can do is in your summers, get involved in activities. This is sort of what Joel was saying, that help you get skills and experience and knowledge of the bioscience industry, so you actually know it's what you want to do. So there are a couple things you can do there. One of the best things is to try to get an internship at a bioscience company. Probably a little easier when you're getting a bit more upper major, but you can start applying right now. Another thing you can do is you can do summer experience programs. So some of those might be typical REU research programs at universities around the country. And there are several in biotech that are research oriented. And then KGI has a number of summer programs that are awesome. We have one called the Careers Beyond the Bench, focused on the bioscience industry. We tend to take people probably like next year, apply for it, rising junior, rising senior, but you can do that. That program is awesome. Or other programs on our summer program, and Lexi can tell you all about them. She's a master of these programs. So those are some of the things you can do. The other thing you can do, and this is probably a bit too micromanaged, is you can start thinking, and I know you're just getting going at Pitzer, and it's awesome that you're there. So I don't want to tell you what classes to take or what skills to get, but I can say that like anything data analytics, programming, plus biology and chemistry is super hot right now. So if you have an opportunity, and if you happen to like this stuff, if you don't like it, don't worry about it, Gwen, you can still come to KGI or get another degree. But if you happen to like programming or data analytics, you can just carve your own future right now in this kind of stuff. So again, if these courses are just your least favorite courses, by all means, do not take them if you just want to be in the lab. But if you like this stuff, do a lot of that as an undergrad, because it'll give you opportunities to get better internships and so forth, because companies are just dying for these skills right now.
The one thing I agree with everything that Professor Casper said. The one thing I would add is on these REU, and we have some research experience programs. We have one called SURE. A lot of schools have them. Is I would look through the list of projects and try to look at ones that are closer to application and further from basic science. Because a lot of the summer projects are very much, let's figure out the structure of this gene, or let's figure out the structure of this binding site on this molecule. And some are more like, hey, we're trying to come up with ways to treat this disease, or we're trying to come up with ways to manage this chronic condition. And so I think if you filter, not all the summer programs may be similar, but within the summer program, some projects may be more close to solving real world problems than others. And so you would find it probably more helpful to work under a professor who's closer to these real world applications, who probably will tend to have more industry contacts and better positioned to understand how the science can be used, not to win Nobel Prizes, but to cure some disease or improve some human health outcome.
A key word there is translational.
Yeah.
You see that word, that usually is a good clue that it's sort of impacting society. And that could be all kinds of things. Is that helpful, Gwen?
Yes, that is very, very helpful. Thank you so much.
Great. And you can contact us for more information about these KGI summer programs in particular. We know a lot about them. Just because I'm talking, I'll say one more thing. This actually could really work for you. Pitzer has been around for a long time, and every university, they have alumni offices and things, and they're trying, I'll just tell you, the reason they have them, you're going to be this person in like 5 or 6 years. They try to give you, they want you to give money back to Pitzer. And one of the ways they do that is trying to engage alumni in various ways with Pitzer. And one of the things you can do is go to the go to the careers office or the alumni office and say, hey, I'm interested in the bioscience industry. Can you see if we have any Pitzer alums that are in the industry, probably in senior positions, they've been there for a while, and can I do an informational interview with them? That doesn't always lead to internships and opportunities, but you'll make connections and network. You'll learn about companies and things like that. But a few years ago, I was teaching a course at CMC, and a student, she was a freshman just like you. She and I didn't tell her this, she did this all by herself. She was real smart. She contacted a Pitzer alum through going to the alumni office that was working at a company called Tarsgen, and he liked her so much he offered her an internship. And there you go. So things like that. Use your university contacts is another one that could really help you.
Well, now I would add to that. So, and by the way, Lexi will give you these slides that you'll have, but if you looked up and see if there are any Pitzer alumni in these leading California companies, then use something like LinkedIn to see, who came from Pitzer is now at Amgen or Edwards or whatever. It would give you kind of lists of some people that you might reach out to directly, particularly if, say, if you have a professor as a contact in common, and you ask your professor, do you remember Andrew, or do you remember Eric or whatever, and then you can drop that name as a way to reach out to those alumni directly.
Yeah, this sounds scary, but these alumni, they love talking to current students.
Yeah.
9 out of 10 times, this is like an easy thing to do. And it doesn't always lead to other opportunities, but it leads to you learning knowledge and meeting somebody. And sometimes they do like, hey, if you ever want an internship here, let me know. Or what you possibly could do is a couple months later, you might see an internship at that company. It's like, hey, I was looking around and here's an internship at this company. Do you know anything about it? And it's not hard for them to they probably know the hiring manager or whoever it is. Like, hey, I talked to Gwen. She seems great. Interview her. So things like that. It's just networking at the end of the day. But you might want to try that.
Got you. Thank you so much. And Steve, what is the name of that program with CMC again?
The program, it's called the Science and Management degree over there. They have a special degree, but the thing is KGI has something called the Team Masters Project. And we have an agreement with Joint Science that you have to apply into it and be accepted, but we accept a lot of students, and it's like 15 or 20 a year. And you could apply to do your senior thesis with us being part of one of our Team Masters projects. And it's great because you're working with master students and it's their fast thesis here, more or less. And you get to work with a company for an entire year. And some of the projects are very technical lab based. Many of them are business based, but they all have a science background, so they count. You still have to do a poster presentation at Pitzer, and you get graded from a KGI faculty member and stuff. But we know all the faculty over there in Joint Science really well, and we've been doing this for about 8 or 9 years now, and it works really well. So again, like you're just a freshman, you're just getting going. But when you're a junior at about this time of the year, so 2 years from now, when you're applying for your senior year, you need to actively find out about it. The professor in charge of it over there right now, her name's Anna Winsel. She's a chemist at CMC. But if you just email, unless something happens to me, I'm going to be here in 2 years. So if you just email me in 2 years, I can tell you who it is.
Okay, cool. I think I'm already in contact with her because she's my advisor, but.
Oh, Anna's your acceptant. Ask her about it. She'll be all excited.
Okay.
Anna's really into the biotech industry. Her PhD was sponsored by Pfizer. Anna's the person I taught that class with a few years ago. So I'm buddies with her.
So we have
She's
time
awesome.
for one more.
You're lucky if you got her as an advisor.
We have time for one more question because we do want to value your time and end on time. And I did want to kind of give you a couple more final thoughts. And you see the slides are in the chat. So does anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, I'm sorry, we've been talking way too much. I apologize.
Yeah, you get us started and we won't stop if you don't get a word in edgewise.
One thing about getting that PhD, you get to talk a lot.
I have a quick question.
Yeah,
Abu Bakr, yes, sorry, I mangled your name. Go
Yes,
ahead.
that's right. Thank you so much for the talk today. So I was hoping to learn more about the opportunities available for MD graduates within the biotech industry, because sometimes I would like look through LinkedIn or online, and I find that people finish medical school and then they went, maybe they maintain clinical practice and they get involved in biotech, or they just go into biotech. So just curious to learn more about that, how it looks like.
So basically within a company, they'll tend to be chief medical officer will be managing things such as the clinical trials. There'll be doctors or pharmacists involved in package labeling and medical affairs. So
medical affairs, that's what I was going to say, by the way, just to add on.
How do we honestly convey information to prescribing physicians or pharmacists about what our drug does and how it works and how it doesn't work in a way that's consistent with FDA regulations? So basically, you're either involved in understanding the unmet need, running the clinical trials and designing them, or you're involved in communicating the results of your clinical trials to people who are out there using your products. And this, if you have a heart valve from Edwards, there's going to be someone in medical affairs who's talking to the surgeons who are debating whether or not to implant this heart valve versus some other heart valve. So those are examples of jobs which are pretty much reserved for either MDs, PharmDs, or sometimes even MD PhDs.
You need a D, basically, is what I would say.
You need a D, yes.
Yeah, another one, continuing medical education. A lot of pharma companies get involved in that. They sponsor conferences, things like that, and they hire doctors to organize these things and network into it. I would say from what Dr. West said there, probably the number one area of all of that though is medical affairs, because they need people. It's not selling drugs, but it's working with the medical community to understand at a deep scientific clinical level what these drugs do in an ethical, honest way. So you're not selling at all. It's not like you're detailing. But medical affairs is just super important to these companies. I mean, mostly hire doctors and PharmDs to do this.
But you just have to have the D. So actually one of my MBS students is going to get her PhD next year. She's applied to 3 schools. We'll see where she goes. One of them is KGI. There are a couple other schools in the LA basin. And she's going to get a PhD because she wants to work in medical affairs. She's always wanted to work in medical affairs. And I think she'd be great at it. She just needs to have the official qualification of being a doctor.
Yeah, thank you so much for this response. Quick question. Have you had people go into the MBS program and then go to medical school? And how, if so, how are their experience looking like?
Yes, we call them pre-meds. And we actually have a 1-year pre-med certificate program, which students come when they just barely miss getting into med school. Their MCAT's slightly too low or whatnot. And then of those students, about 40 to 60% of them stay for a master's. We have several masters, and every year we're getting about 10 of them go into the MBS program. And we've also had some go directly into MBS and then go to medical school. And what they're trying to do is either A, they're trying to stand out with the unusual background of the MBS rather than just coming from undergraduate. B, so for example, if they can speak about healthcare economics, how drugs are paid for, that's something that the average medical school applicant can't speak to. In fact, it's something the average faculty interviewer can't speak to. So it's a differentiator. The second is that they may want to be an administrator in medical when they're doctors or in a hospital, and so they do the MBS because it gives them the business skills to understand the business responsibilities. Or if they have their own practice, they have to run their own business. And then the third is we had one of our earliest, most successful students who went to Quinnipiac Medical School, wanted to be a surgeon entrepreneur. Most implantable medical devices were created by surgeons who basically said, we need a tool for implanting these things. We need a new heart valve. We need a new hip implant or new hip joint or whatever. And so she wants to start her own company. And so she figured, well, the MBS would prepare her for being an entrepreneur after she does her medical school or residencies and their clinical rotations and so on. So those are kind of the 3 paths. That's one of the things I enjoy most is working with the pre-meds who are converting to MBS and kind of help them. Oh, and then the fourth is some didn't get into medical school right away. So to go to someplace like Amgen for a couple of years, make some money, pay off some loans, get some experience to talk about in their applications. And sometimes they decide not to go on to medical school. They decide to stay in industry. But so those are actually the four paths that the people going to medical school tend to do through the MBS. And we have other degrees. The MS and MSTM are probably the other ones that are most commonly used by people seeking to go to medical school.
Just to add on to that, and I promise we're good at repeating each other, I won't repeat it, but what I love about it is you get a plan A and a plan B. So your plan A is to go to medical school. But for some reason, if for some reason, because it's, they only accept about 20-25% of people get in. So for some reason you don't profile well and you don't get in, you can still get that awesome clinical research job at Amgen, or you can do one of 30 other things. So it's not really that. Some people do decide when they're here, it's like, God, I've learned all about this business stuff and this is what I want to do. But that's actually pretty rare. Most of the students that come here wanting to go to medical school, go to medical school. But you have that plan B if it doesn't work out. Where if you just do a straight post-bac program, I don't know what you do if you don't get into medical school. You just lost a year plus a gap year for a lot of students.
Well, you
So
end up doing
that's what I
clinical
really like.
jobs. You end up doing shadowing and scribing and other clinical type jobs. And that's the other thing is if you're killing 2 years, would you rather spend it as manufacturing biologics at Amgen or making heart valves at Edwards, or would you rather spend it shadowing a doctor for 2 years?
We're doing clinical research right in a hospital, which is what a lot of them do.
All right. Well, I just wanted to present two last slides just in the interest of kind of wrapping this all up. Professor Casper mentioned we have, and this actually goes back to Renee's earlier question. We have a summer program that we call Careers Beyond the Bench. And so basically, if you want to be a bench scientist, this is not the program for you. This is the program for people who say, I might be interested in doing something other than bench science or being a doctor. And so what are the various opportunities? And that's what this program was created for. It's a free summer program. Lexi would be glad to give you all the information about how to apply. She put the link in the chat room. But the idea is what we want to do is just kind of expose you to the breadth of these careers and also to do an interdisciplinary project that is kind of representative to what a student would do in the MBS program or in their industry career. And then the other program we have, and that the virtual program requires about a 20-hour-a-week commitment, and the in-person program requires about a 30-hour-a-week commitment. And not everybody can do that. And so we also have a program we call the Biotech Career Speaker Series, which we started last year. Professor Kumar ran it. It was a great success. And basically, you're spending 2 to 3 hours a week at lunchtime in California coming to hear a speaker talk about manufacturing or regulatory affairs or marketing or consulting. And so people find this is a very easy and useful way to get a sense of what these different career options are. And maybe you'll figure out that there's one that's definitely for you, or maybe you'll decide that no, you really would rather be a doctor or a bench scientist because these businessy jobs really aren't for you. But it's a very low commitment because it's a couple, 3 hours a week, and this is entirely virtual. So these are kind of our two. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I quickly add for this particular speaker series? If you notice the header, it says career speaker, right? So I just want to underline that it is not your typical talk about, like, let's say, a very specific technical topic. It is mostly about how they went about their career, their pathways, and what kinds of decisions you made. Like the question Abu Bakr you just asked, right? Like some of the things that you might think about when you're making these career decisions. So that's the most valuable part I think students get from this, is that they went through the same things that as you are going through in terms of your questions. So
yeah. And both of these tie back to the goal of the MBS program, which is we basically have to tell people about these jobs they didn't know existed. And then we have to say, if you want to go after being a consultant or working in marketing at Amgen, we can help you get that job. And so the summer programs are our way to give you a taste of what these career paths are. And you may decide you want to come to KGI, you may decide you don't want to pursue these jobs at all, but we offer them for free because they really help people understand, well, what would these other paths be other than the one to get a PhD, a postdoc, and become a university professor, which is the one that my professor has been recommending to me for the last 3 years. But I'm not sure if that's the one that I want to do. So, and you have these slides, and Lexi put the link for applying for all of our summer programs up in the chat bar. So with that, we're done with the formal program, but all the three of us would be willing to sit around and answer any questions that you might have.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mateen and Angel and the rest of it. If you have any questions, more than happy to stick around a bit more.
Thank you everyone for coming.
Yeah, and you can leave though if you want now too. I know a lot of you want to get dinner or do your studies or whatever, but love meeting you guys, and definitely consider KGI. It's a great place to be.
Thank you so much. It was really informative.
Glad we could help.